equitable and responsive to the taxpayers, and that public funds should be used only for public schools. I share this context because due to the pandemic, we are facing a tremendous challenge to fulfill the promise of a quality education for our children. Our educators are doing their very best to respond to state guidance and provide a safe learning environment while meeting the academic, social, emotional, and nutritional needs of students. But let's not fool ourselves. The new fall school arrangements will be tough on students, families, and school staff alike. There's a lot to unpack and understand about the steps being taken to assure optimal learning and support for students and families under these difficult circumstances, and I'm confident we'll have a robust discussion. Before I introduce our moderator, well, you already met Jessie Coffey, but I'll introduce her again, and she will once again share the protocol for this meeting. Jessie?
Thank you so much, Jackie. So I'm Jessie Coffey. I'm the communications chair for the League of Women Voters of the Akron area. I'm going to welcome all of you to our virtual forum tonight. Because of the forum, we want you to be able to enjoy the content that these wonderful speakers are going to provide. So we will be muting everybody, and only the speakers will be unmuting and presenting the content. We would love for you to contribute questions and comments, and all you have to do is click on the chat button in order to do that. We really appreciate you following this so we can focus on why we're here, which is to learn more about how our local team is going to respond in these times. Thank you, Jackie.
And we are recording this session.
Correct. And I did forget to tell everyone we are recording this session for some of the folks who weren't able to join us tonight.
Thank you. Okay, so leading our discussion tonight is the inimitable Michael Shearer, editor of the Akron Beacon Journal. He will be introducing our speakers and moderating the Q&A after the speaker presentations. So take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Jackie. Appreciate your help in putting this all together for everybody tonight. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the forum. We have 4 speakers tonight that are going to make presentations about how the Akron Public Schools plan to reopen this fall. The plan that's being considered by the Board of Education right now and will be voted on here in the near future. Obviously, the school district and all school districts across the country face monumental challenges of getting all kids in school and educated in the fall and doing so safely without jeopardizing the health of anybody involved. So they have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm going to start off here by introducing our first speaker. When we're done with the 4 speakers, I will moderate the questions as typed in the chat as indicated earlier. So our first speaker is Dr. Alan McWilliams-Woods, who has served as the Akron Public Schools Chief Academic Officer and Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction since 2008. She's a lifelong educator who began her career as a teacher in Akron in 1989 and has since served in numerous key leadership positions over 31 years with the district, including Medicaid consultant, special education coordinator, and director of special education. She also devoted 20 years as a part-time faculty member in educational foundations and special services instruction at Kent State University, and has been involved in numerous projects in Akron and serves on the board of Connexus CNEO. It's a Project Grad Akron and is an active and proud member of Leadership Akron Class 26, I think it says here. Anyway, so Ellen, welcome, and go ahead.
Well, it is absolutely wonderful being here with everyone tonight, especially in partnership with such an incredible organization that has always advocated and been tightly aligned with public education and serving all of our students across this fine state of Ohio. What an incredible time for us to be talking and for us to be presenting in the middle of this pandemic and really in the middle of such a critical time in the lives of all of the school districts across the country. I'm kind of reflecting back on where we've been during this emergency remote learning that we did in the spring and then trying to figure out how to safely bring back our students and faculty for the fall. And here we are right at the beginning of July, when a lot of these decisions, the types of changes that we've been making, and this is very similar to so many businesses out there, is, normally this would take years for us to make the types of changes that we had really a very short amount of time to take. But we want to share tonight with you what seemed to work well, what did we learn from this past spring, and then what are some of the choices and challenges and maybe some joys moving into this fall. Just in terms of context for our district, we have 21,000 students, about 47 schools and programs across the city of Akron. Our mission really is to be the #1 urban school system in the country. We have been the leader in Ohio for quite a number of years. And 5 years ago, we decided to really shoot for something larger and for us to be that trailblazer urban district. Really focusing, our major transition the past 5 years has been to shifting to college and career academies, where all of our students are from kindergarten on are preparing for college and careers after high school. No longer is our mission just to graduate kids. Now it's to be sort of the economic engine for our community and to prepare students for college and career through our college and career academies. We have 57 different college and career academies that 100% of our high school students participate in. So next slide. So if you could transition to the next slide, right. As we made the transition, it was 55 days of switching to sort of we'll call it the emergency remote learning that happened the middle of March. And then we had 55 days of that 100% remote learning. We called that APS, Akron Public Schools Connected Learning. We were much better positioned than most districts to make that kind of quick, immediate transition. 7 years ago, back in 2012, we started building out technology infrastructure in the district. We rebuilt our whole internet bandwidth infrastructure and increased our bandwidth every single year for the 7 years. We hired full-time staff to work in the schools to support our technology platform. We shifted all of our curriculum to digital curriculum so that all kids could access the curriculum 24/7. We went one-to-one in 2016. We called that one-to-world, one kid connecting to the world. And we went one-to-one preschool through 12th grade. So we already were in a position where every single student in our district, all 21,000 students, including our preschoolers, had their own individual computer. We use Chromebooks, individual devices. We also have run for 15 plus years, we've run our own online school program. So we've always had about 250 some students who've chosen to learn remotely 100% online for a little over 15 years. So we already kind of knew this business. We knew how to educate students remotely. Now, certainly with this infrastructure and being well positioned that we didn't have to scramble like most districts to go get devices in the hands of kids. We also had Google Classrooms, which are online classrooms in the sky that our teachers used to post all their assignments. We already had that in place. We already had video conferencing like this in place in our district that our teachers could use every single day in their classroom. But we had no idea that we were preparing for a pandemic where 21,000 of our students in 2 weeks' time, we went from brick and mortar with a small group online to all of a sudden everybody remotely. But thankfully, we have this infrastructure in place. Next slide. So what we've done now is we've spent time over the past 2 months, and we created a team of, it was a little over 140 people, teachers, principals, parents, community members, with student focus groups, to reflect back at what we did the last 55 days of school, where we had everyone learning remotely, where the teachers were teaching remotely using video conferencing just like this every day. And then where do we go? What did we learn from that? And then how do we get better? And then how do we follow the health guidelines to reopen? So I'm going to share both a look back and then moving forward, what we're thinking and what our plans are. Next slide. We had 6 principles as we reflected on last spring and planned for the fall. These were our guideposts for all of our design for next year. And we're still in the draft phase, just so you know, and I'll say that multiple times. We haven't made firm decisions yet. We've put out some recommendations to the board, but then we've been waiting for health guidelines from the governor that just came at the end of last week. And now we're making some modifications, and we'll be going back to the board, and you'll see that in a minute. So the 6 guideposts for our planning. First of all, we did not want to lose momentum. We've had incredible partnerships through our college and career academies. I mentioned that 100% of our students pick a college and career pathway similar to a university major for their schooling and their education while they're in high school. And all through middle school, they're preparing for this decision in 10th grade. So we didn't want to lose momentum with that. So we knew whatever design, even how we taught remotely in the spring, we wanted to make sure we kept that forward momentum towards our goals, all of our goals in college and career academies. Obviously, safety was huge, both physically and social emotionally, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that during this forum. Equity was critical. Racial justice and equity. We have had a board policy and strategies around equity, and we also have passed a very strong resolution on racial justice. And we knew we had to make sure, as kids were learning remotely and we were thinking about design for the fall, how do we ensure that this isn't available just for kids who had families at home who could support? How can we make sure that we had equity across the board and provided all the supports needed to get there? Educator autonomy and differentiation we knew was going to be important, as well as seamless transitions. We are going into this fall knowing that what we plan as of the first date at the end of August for school, it may look very different 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in. It may be that schools get shut down because of a COVID outbreak. It may be that the whole district gets shut down again by the governor. We wanted to make sure we had a system that we could seamlessly go in and out. If kids were face-to-face for a few days and then had to go remote, we wanted to make sure we could do that. And with our infrastructure that we have in place, we can seamlessly do that. And lastly is the fiscal responsibility through all of this. We had already been having some discussions about needing to get back on the ballot for a levy. And obviously the expenses and how we design this is going to have a significant financial impact, and we're going to share some of that with you as well. Next slide. So here's some of the lessons learned. I'm just going to highlight some of the things that we learned from this spring. And we did surveys. We did multiple ways of surveying. We brought in a market research team to do a very more random sampling, scientific type survey to make sure we were getting equity in our responses. And then we also did open surveys for all families, and we also did focus groups. So what we learned from the spring is the importance of that 7-year technology, the importance of having our teachers well trained in all of that. The union management collaboration has been key. We have been bonded all the way through. Our union president co-chaired that 140 member team with me, and that relationship has been critical. From parents, what they communicated is they had excellent or good satisfaction with how we did the spring with remote learning, with 100% of our kids learning every day from our live teachers teaching. And so that's great, but I'm going to dig in a little bit more to where some of the gaps then start to emerge. We also have 96% of our families said they have internet at home. We have had an intensive strategy in dedicated full-time staff working with families to get them connected because that was an equity issue for us. And so we had literally full-time staff dedicated to working with families to make sure they got connected. We distributed over 500 hotspots for families that couldn't get connected themselves through the different means available. So we ended up with 96%. About 3% said they had access like at other people's, like their grandparents' home or other places. And then 1% with no internet, that we will absolutely close that gap by the fall. And the amount of work was appropriate. The biggest concern for families was educating their kids at home. I think everyone who had children at home experienced this past spring. The challenge was to keep kids engaged day to day and making sure that they were fully accessing the education available remotely. Next slide. So when we dug in a little bit more about what families wanted moving forward to the fall, right now, 79%, and this was before they knew what the models were being recommended, the draft models, 79% said that they would like to have their kids go back to school. 12% weren't sure, and 9% preferred the remote learning, 100% continuing remote learning. And we're going to be offering that to all families pre-K through 12, that if they want to have their kids stay home, they're able to do that, and we'll provide the instruction just like we did this spring. Families were definitely interested in some more training. They felt like their kids knew a whole lot more about accessing all of the educational curriculum than themselves, and they wanted some additional training. And a couple of the kind of basic needs that I think is important for all of us to understand is that 43%, this was the highest rated concern for families, is childcare, and being able to cover whenever a child is home, and being able to cover, especially during this time when childcares were being stressed due to the pandemic themselves. 38% said they have a need for mental health supports. That is huge. If you think about it, 38% of our families said, and our parents and guardians said they need support mental health wise. And then 30% said they needed that connection to other resources, and food was a high need for families, and sometimes housing came up as well. Next slide. So we also surveyed teachers, and as you can imagine, when we asked teachers how things went in the spring and what were kind of hopeful and what were challenges and helpful things, 70% said the biggest challenge was connecting with students and making sure that they were constantly engaged. When we looked at all of our data on connection, because we had this tech infrastructure already, we also were able to monitor kids' activity very well in all those digital tools that we have. Here's how the numbers kind of came out. We had 93% each week when we looked at kind of the activity in for our kids every week. In the Chromebooks, we could see that 93 to 94% of our kids were connecting regularly into their Chromebooks, signing in, doing work, okay, going into their computer, which is great. That's amazing. When we looked at then the teachers, they actually rated kids' attendance by participation. And there were 3 ratings, what percent were actively participating, how many were inconsistently participating, and then how many during that week they really had no participation. So remember, we had 93 to 94% of our kids connecting into their computers and their Chromebooks every single day. And we could see that, okay? But when you actually talk to the teachers and they rated their kids to say who were connecting with their instruction, it actually dropped down to somewhere between more around 85%. So 85% of the kids were connecting into their lessons and engaged in their lessons, but 93 to 94% were actually on their Chromebooks. So those were the discussions we were having with families, because parents would say, oh no, my kid is on for hours on their computer. But then the teachers are saying, I haven't heard from the kid for days. So the kids might have been working on other things, but not their schoolwork on their Chromebooks. And those are the conversations we would have with families. Now, breaking that down a little bit more, so 85% of the kids were engaged in their lessons. About a little more than half were actively engaged, regularly completing their assignments, connecting in on video conferencing with their families. And then about 40 to 43% were inconsistent. And we know that our families' lives were very hectic during this pandemic time. We know that unemployment is a significant issue with our families, and they were experiencing more unemployment, obviously, during this pandemic. So even though 80 to 85% of the kids were engaging, it was a little bit less than half were the inconsistent. And those are the kids that obviously we worry about. We worry about the academic impact on being inconsistent with their learning. And then the most troubling number is about 15% each week we didn't get any participation from. So, and that a kid may have participated one week and then not the next week, but each week we had about 15% of the students who were not connecting and participating. And what we did is we had a role called connectors, where we had staff in every single building, and their sole job was to reach out and find these disconnected students and engage with them and talk to the families and track them down and send security team members to go knock on doors to find the kids. So we did everything we could to get them connected. But those are the challenges of remote learning. You know, when the kids walk in the door and they're face to face, we have an opportunity to engage. It's a little bit tougher when they're remote, and to be able to keep the kids connected when you're using texting and calling and knocking on doors to try to find the kids to connect them into their schoolwork remotely. But that connector role was critical for us to be able to just pound the pavement until we found kids and then really counsel the families. And a lot was that they had other things going on, and we helped meet their other basic family needs. And then that helped the student access their education. Okay, next slide. So we did have, as part of our design process, then moving forward, we had a health advisory. We had 140 people on 8 different teams. One of them was this key health advisory. You can go to the next slide. When we looked at the design for the health advisory and looking at what do we need to follow going into this next year, these were the major principles that were from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. They were in the draft guidelines from the governor and the Department of Health and our Ohio Department of Ed. And so these were kind of the guiding principles that all districts were working off of. The first 2, I want to just show you some implication of what happens if you have to follow the guidelines that says 6 feet of social distance and 50% capacity on a bus, kind of the implication of what that means for a district. You can turn to the next slide. So here's a picture of the bus. And the bus on the left with mostly green, that shows what happens when our buses are 66 kids on a bus. That's the capacity. And we usually run with pretty tight maximum capacity, transporting students all over the city. If you have one student per seat, if that's what came down as the best safety-wise for kids, that cuts down the bus from 66 to 22. And so you end up having to, we already double or triple our routes already going to elementary and then middle schools. So now all of a sudden you go from 66 kids on a bus to 22 kids on a bus. The visual on the right that has the orange and the green, that is with students, if you had to go all the way down to every other seat to meet the 6 feet of social distancing, that's 11 students per bus. So you go on the left is 1 student per seat, and that's 22 students. On the right, if you actually go every other seat for 6 feet of social distance, you go down to 11. And you can see just that alone, if you can imagine trying to transport thousands of students, given those 2 restrictions, which were the original restrictions, right away, those are sort of game changers for districts. We'd have to double or triple our fleet of buses, which obviously no district can do, and we weren't in a position to do. Now, since the governor has put out the new guidance that just came last Thursday, they're looking at, and our Summit County Public Health is looking at whether we can definitely do on the left 1 student per seat. And there's some discussion about districts being allowed to do 2 students per seat as well. Next slide. The other huge consideration is the Center for Disease Control recommends 6 feet of social distancing. And you've heard that everywhere, you know, that's what every place we go into the businesses, that's what we're supposed to follow. That was in the original draft guidance from the state that we were going to have to follow 6 feet of social distancing. What came out Thursday from the governor was not a mandatory 6 feet, but a recommendation for 6 feet. And then the local districts with the local public health departments can make decisions based on our own risk factors in our county. But this is just to show you an example of what happens to a classroom. On the left-hand side is a regular classroom with about 25 students per class. And this is a real classroom. This is our classroom that our architects designed. If you look to the right, it's 11 or 12 students when you get to the 6 feet. So again, if you think about 6 feet of social distance, that's a game changer for districts because that means you have to split every class in half, or some classes even almost to a third, which means if you were going to have 100% of the kids back, you would have to double the classroom size and double the number of teachers, which I don't know any districts that have space in their buildings to double the classroom size and to double the staff. So that's where districts were starting to look at staggered schedules. Now, since the governor released the guidelines last Thursday, all the districts are looking at the guidance and trying to make determinations with their own local county health, how to safely reopen. So the guidelines may, or the way that schools open, including us, may shift a little bit by next week or the week after when schools start to announce across this whole region how we're going to reopen. Next slide. The school models then, when you think about that 6 feet social distance, or even whatever the feet social distance ends up being that each district decides, there's really basically only 3 choices. You either are 100% remote, and we are going to offer that to pre-K through 12. So any family who wants to keep their kids remote will be able to continue to do that just like we've done for 15 plus years, plus this spring, even on a larger scale. Or the second option is a blended, which is what we have looked at based on the 6 feet social distancing, where you have kids come in shifts basically, and that's from 3rd through 12th grade. That's what the original proposal prior to the governor's guidelines. That's the original proposal that that our team, our 140 plus team recommended. and having students come on some type of staggered schedule, 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And then the last option is 100% site-based. And in the Akron Public Schools, the original recommendation was that preschool through second grade, that we try to get the students in 5 days a week. But again, all districts, now that the guidelines have come out last Thursday, everyone is looking at them now and finalizing plans that we'll be bringing forth. Next slide. The last thing is just students with disabilities. We are prioritizing students with disabilities, especially students with significant disabilities, to make sure they're in school every day. And then students with other needs are going to be individualized based on their individualized education plans. So we'll be working with families individually there, but that came out as a strong recommendation from our planning team to prioritize students, particularly with more significant disabilities, to make sure they could come to school every single day. Next slide. The last thing for this section before I turn it over to my colleague, the instructional recovery concept is when we look at the spring, we know that some students thrived in this remote world. We have teachers who've said students who were incredibly distracted in class and always missing their assignments because they were so engaged with all the 25 other kids in the class, remotely, they thrived and they did great because the distractions were eliminated and they were getting support from their family. But then we can say the flip side, that students who were super engaged in a face-to-face setting, when they went remote, they struggled and they found it very difficult to learn kind of in this virtual manner. So we knew that we had to do some planning for instructional recovery. So this summer, we have significantly expanded our summer programming. In grades 1st through 4th grade, we have school starting 4 weeks early virtually so that we can, with their new teachers, so that we can start the learning right off the bat, start to fill some of those gaps before we head into officially starting in the fall. Next slide. So I'd like to turn it over to Yvonne Culver, who is our coordinator over all of our school counseling services and our college access services. And she's going to talk through the mental health component and how we supported students in the spring, and then looking forward, the types of mental health supports we're going to have to provide.
Yvonne, just make sure you turn your microphone back on.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to kind of start with the recommendations that the committee made. And as Ellen shared earlier, we have been really lucky that our leadership has had the vision to build the systems. So all that was necessary for us to move is to tweak things. So when the recommendations came from the Mental Health and Transitions Committee, they wanted us to provide a district resource about COVID-19. There are so many messages going around about COVID-19, and a lot of our students and some of our families, their source of news is Facebook and other social media sites, and they may not always have the most accurate news. So that created in itself a level of anxiety. And so we needed to provide a district resource where families could go and have credible information that aligned with what's being said from our health organizations, both locally and nationally. We wanted to expand our strategies to support the mental health needs of students, and not just our students, but our students needed to be surrounded by healthy adults. We needed to look at staff and make sure that the teacher, who was also experiencing this pandemic on personal levels, had the tools and support they needed to be able to stand and comfort and deliver to the students that they are working with, as well as the families. We wanted to make sure that the whole village was able and had the capacity to support the students. We wanted to ensure wraparound supports for students that are identified with high risk factors. We already know who some of those students are. And as Ellen shared before, sometimes changing the environment, people will change tiers. And I'll say more about that later. But a student who was in the universal tier may shift up to moderate because of the changes. Or a student who was in the moderate tier, now being surrounded by family, may go back down into the universal, or vice versa. So we wanted to make sure that we had some kind of way to identify the changing needs for our students and identify those high risk and make sure they have what they need in order to be successful. And transitions are always a stressful time. So we wanted to make sure that we had strategies for transitions. The students starting kindergarten. Can you imagine being a parent that for the first time is sending your student to kindergarten while there's a pandemic? And just how anxiety provoking that would be, and what transitions need to happen so you as a parent or you as a family are comfortable sending your child into the next level. So we wanted to make sure we paid some attention for the transitions. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we knew immediately, and one of the things that we already had in place, is this is not something that the schools can do alone. So we already have some key partners in place. Minority Behavioral Health Group and Red Oak Behavioral Health already had therapists in our building. So families could access mental health supports from community counselors right in the building. They were able to see the students and we could connect with them. We have teachers in Akron Children's Hospital. So our students that have mental health issues that are serious enough that require hospitalization or partial hospitalization, we already have teachers in place that work with their educational need while they are in that environment. Summit Education Initiative is one of our key partners, and they have a group called Out of School Time Partners that go through a training, and then those partners are able to access the attendance data, given family permission, or the grades data, once again with family permission, so that the student that they're working with after school, or the student that they're working with at the boys club or the girls club or the YMCA or SWAG, they can see how that student is doing in school and help to support that, which creates a village. And then 2 of our clusters currently have family resource centers through the United Way that are there to address some of those family needs, the needs for housing, the needs for utility support, the needs to get food sources. So the Family Resource Center, even financial stability, they do financial coaching. So 2 of our clusters already have that. And then we are looking to expand next year. And then eventually we're looking for every cluster to have a family resource center that is supported by the United Way. So having that partnership allowed us to be ready to expand to the virtual. So if you could go to the next slide. I want to share when I talked about the tiers. So we have in place what we call our social emotional pyramid. And our social emotional pyramid has the tiers. So at the bottom is that universal tier. That's those wellness strategies, those prevention strategies, those things that we all do to just stay mentally healthy. We notice when we are getting stressed. So we know when we are getting stressed, there are some things that we can do. And everyone experiences stress at some time or another. And so those are the strategies that everyone needs to learn. And we have those kind of things in place. I'm not sure if you are aware, but the Department of Education put in K through 12 social emotional learning standards for all students that teachers are working to incorporate in their class. And those are just things that help us become healthy individuals. So the self-awareness, the respect for others, the understanding our emotions and how to manage them, the identifying those things that we do well and learning how to build on those. So those are all part of those social emotional learning state standards that once again are already in place. So we were looking at how do you expand those to a virtual presentation. And I'll share with you in a minute some of the things that some of our counselors got really creative with doing. If we look at the moderate tier, that's when you're starting to notice that the prevention and the wellness strategies, I'm doing the deep breathing, I'm going for walks, I'm doing things to try to relax my guided relaxation and my anxiety is still up there, then I might need some additional support. So I'm moving into that moderate level. So that might require some individual services or some group services. It might require some mentoring and monitoring. It might require a family referral because maybe my anxiety is high because I don't know where I'm going to live tomorrow. So in order to get that anxiety down, we have to work with the whole family system. So it might require some of those things. And then finally, the intensive, those are the things that require the professional help of mental health therapists or doctors. It may require medication. It requires some more intensive therapy. So those are referrals to our community-based therapists or our community partners. And what we do is we just make sure we communicate with them and keep those lines of communication open so that whatever you are doing in your therapy session, we could provide that continuity of care. So if this is something that's working in the home setting, let's try it at school and make sure it's working there. So that would be our pyramid and the different levels. So where are we looking at taking this in the fall? And you can go to the next slide. One thing we found out immediately is we needed to expand our set of eyes. We no longer had someone who could see you walking down the hall and see that something was going on that day. Or, we no longer could get that referral from the teacher that said, I'm just watching Johnny and Johnny's just not himself right now. So we needed to expand our eyes. And one of the things that we have in place is we want to train more staff and community members in mental health first aid. That was actually on our agenda to do this summer. Last fall, we sent 7 people. So we have 7 certified trainers in mental health first aid. And mental health first aid is kind of along the same premise of like CPR. If I notice something is going wrong, it's not my job to treat it, but it's my job to notice and to monitor and to connect that person to the support they need. So we want to train more staff and community members to be what mental health first aiders call noticers, and then are comfortable making those connections so students can be supported. We also want to raise the awareness of the community resources. There are families out there struggling financially that don't know with one phone call, they can sit down with a financial coach that'll go over things with them, that will help them learn how to talk to creditors and learn how to stop disconnections and work with people to do those things. But our family resource centers are there and available to provide that support. And then we want to share some best practices from this spring. We had really good things come out of this spring. One of the things I asked the counselors to do is share at the end of the year how they grew personally and professionally because of COVID-19. One of our counselors created a web page for families and for staff. And she had a teacher wellness room where teachers who were feeling the stress could go into this virtual room and have a choice board. And there were breathing images where you match your breathing to the diagram so it slows down your breathing. Or there was guided relaxation. Or if you're one of those people that you needed to throw stuff, there was virtual things that you could throw against a wall and hear a breaking sound. So there was so much in there just for the teachers that were under this stress and needed a moment. And then for students that weren't signing in to the counselor page for the counselor support, the counselor started going into the classroom, into the teacher's Google Classroom, and putting in where you could link to resources in the teacher's Google Classroom. So you didn't have to go to another place for help. And so that was pretty effective. Another thing that we learned, one of our first concerns was, how do you do a risk assessment when the student is not in my office? And how do you keep that student safe while I'm trying to contact a family member? We got very quickly a GoGuardian, and GoGuardian is a system within our computer that says that a student, for example, a student has researched how easy ways to die. And so our counselor gets an alert, and we got one of those, and the counselor was unable to track down the student by phone. They weren't responding to email. None of the emergency contacts were responding. And so we were able to contact student services, and student services sent a car to the home to check on the student. And it just happened that the student was a teenager that was sleeping in, and the father worked nights, and so he wasn't answering the phone. And the student was fine, but we are going to err on the side of caution when those kind of practices arise.
Yvonne?
Yes.
We are running a bit short on time here for presentations, so I don't know how much more time you have, but if It's all been great information, but if anything, final comments you can make to wrap up, and then we'll move on to the last two presenters, if that's okay.
That's fine. So my last thing that we learned is we are going to continue to listen to our families, to our students. We're going to learn from them, their needs, and then we're going to adjust and make sure we are meeting those needs. So with that, I am finished.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I don't mean to push it along here, but we do want to get time for questions from the citizens who have joined us.
Absolutely. Why don't we skip past this next slide and we'll go right to Laura Kepler
Yeah, Laura
for
Kepler.
child nutrition.
Okay. Yes, Laura is the registered dietitian and is the in her 26th year of school nutrition with APS, the past 12 years as department coordinator. So Laura, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. For the essence of time, I'll just try to review these 6 slides. When school is in session, we serve to the Akron students 27,000 meals per day. Our district poverty level is close to 91%. We do know that is increasing at numbers we're looking for next year. But that allows us to serve all of our meals to all of our students at no charge. So one of the things when the COVID talk started coming in February and March, we do feed meals in the summer when schools are closed. So that's we were lucky to have that little bit of background. We have a partnership with the city of Akron and do those meals when schools are closed. So that was sort of the template we had to go on. But this pandemic closure is something that we've never experienced. In the summer meals, we do about 2,000 to 3,000 a day. So we thought we would increase a little bit and had planned for 5,000 or 6,000. The very first few days, we were doing 12,000 to 15,000 meals. Since the closure, we have done 625,000 meals. We're still serving daily throughout this summer now, and we're doing about 6,000 meals per day. This is all a result of unprecedented waivers that we received for the federal meal program regulations that has allowed us this opportunity to continue to feed kids. And we are feeding children of all ages 1 to 18, regardless of the school they attend. Our sites are open sites, so even if they're not an Akron Public School student, and all of the cost of these meals and the meal programs are funded through federal reimbursement. So that is a reimbursement based on the meal served and not the district local money. You can go to the next slide. Can't really see this very well, but all sites are listed on our akronschools.com website. But I just wanted to, one of the very first things we had to decide in a very quick time, usually with summer, we have months to plan, but we had to really put this together in a matter of days. And we started deciding what locations would we feed out of. But really, there's no really good, easy way to pick that. So we opened all neighborhood schools. We have 37 sites throughout the city of Akron, and those are still open, as I said today. Next slide. That was a very good decision to keep all of our sites open because the need has been spread out all across the city. There's been just responses in all areas of the city where the need is great with loss of employment or reduced employment due to service jobs lost. And so had we tried to pick in schools that we thought the participation would have been better, we've been very surprised about some of the schools that are still servicing a lot of meals. But the community response to this has been so overwhelming positive. If you read anything in the media, school meals are not always a favorite topic. Even in the school day, the breakfast and lunch rooms are probably not the educators or administrators' favorite time of the day. So it's not always a thankful job. The students appreciate it, but the community response to this has been overwhelming. From the very beginning, we had organizations, individuals, teachers, counselors taking meals to kids. We had many of our partners that we already, like Yvonne had alluded to, Red Oak Behavioral Health. We had the Minority Behavioral Health. We had AMHA. We had many of our partners pick up meals and take them to families. And what this did was allow them to connect and have contact and support students. So the meals were sort of the buffer. Very early on, our employees stepped up, but the response was so overwhelming. The meal distribution sites were so busy that we were able to employ the safety team members and bus drivers who were not doing their normal duties at that time. And they all worked throughout April and May and to the end of the school year assisting with the meal distribution sites. It was identified that there was students over in the Summit Lake area where we no longer have a school. So we were able to get together and partner with ASCA and open the Reach Opportunity Center. Next slide. Throughout this whole thing, besides the breakfast and lunches that we have provided, we have been a kind of a community hub for a lot of other food resources. When schools abruptly closed, we were able to donate a lot of our perishable food over to the Akron Canton Food Bank and the Haven of Rest to go back into the community's food that we couldn't use in the grab-and-go meals. We have had over 3,000 cases of frozen meats donated from USDA that we have passed out with these grab-and-go meals to our families. Additional places like Pizza Hut have provided pizzas. This has been a really, in addition to the food that we're providing, the meals, there has been a lot of other resources tied up into this. And when I say like the community response has been so positive, words like grateful, thankful. We've had teachers and counselors reach out to us when schools abruptly closed and they lost contact with their students. Their students' needs were one of their greatest concerns, and they were so thankful that they were still having the ability to have meals. We had parents in tears because these were parents that have lost employment, that have not always, have never really needed to rely on need. We had a parent indicate to us that she would have found a way to feed her kids, but she would have went without. One of our parents from Betty Jane indicated they didn't really need the food as much as her son needed the emotional support, that when her son was really scared when they were, at the very beginning, and you were hearing a lot of negativity, and then he couldn't go to school, he didn't see his friends, that being able to get up, set the routine, do their schoolwork, and then walk to school and still get the meals and see the familiar face of his lunch lady just really helped more in emotional support than even his nutritional needs. Go on to the next slide. One of the biggest things keeping the schools open, again, it was such an abrupt closure and we really couldn't cut off contact with our families. So the meal distribution sites, were used for a lot of we gave connector internet information so our families would understand where they could go or how they could connect or where to get resources. They were homework pickups and drop-offs. We passed out 2020 census information through the GAR Foundation. They had Goodwill make and donated 3,500 washable masks, face masks, and we were able to donate those to families with the meal. So there was just a lot of other supports that were provided around the meal distribution and given to the families. And to the last slide. I'm sorry, the next slide. I think just looking back on everything we accomplished, it seems like so much and so long ago, but I know looking ahead, we still have a lot of work to do. As the child nutrition and providing meals, we are just a support to the educational team of the district. So as they look to reopen and recover in our plans for APS, then we will look to continue to provide the nutritional needs and try to remove all barriers. What we wholeheartedly believe in child nutrition is that a hungry child cannot learn, whether that's at home or in school.
All right, thank you so much, Laura. Ryan, just a real brief summary of what you're here to talk about on finances, I guess, then we'll move into questions.
Thank you so much. I will be brief. We've got 3 slides to wrap us up and bring us home here to get to those important questions. I think the takeaway so far, and I'm always amazed from the finance office, is about programming. Our programming is so strong. It's amazing to see what our district and community and the support mechanism has been able to do with a $500 million organization since March 13th. And to be able to put this programming in place is a humbling task that it's just a thrill and joy to come to work every day. We have to protect that programming and staff. We've worked hard with the Federal Department of Education, the Ohio Department of Education, and with our local stakeholders on how to make this $500 million organization be nimble. If you can flip to the next slide, please. These are some of the costs that we've costed out, worked with purchasing consortiums, and to give you a highlight here about being good stewards of taxpayers' money, we received about $10 million from the federal government, passed through from the state, for what's called the CARES Act. As you can imagine, we need additional hand sanitizer to the tune of about $1.2 million, or $2 million in face masks, or additional hotspots and technology that have already been talked about, or Chromebooks, and additional labor in our buildings to do deep cleaning in between our buildings. We've been able to do this and proactively plan for next school year within that budget. Next and final slide. Again, we started with programming, and you got to see how strong our programming was and is. Unfortunately, there is a time in a school district's fiscal cycle where we have to come back and talk to the local taxpayers about future levy dollars. And we are great stewards of taxpayer dollars. On average, over the last 30 plus years, Akron Public Schools has gone to the ballot on average about every 6 years. We've stretched it 8. We've stretched it 8, not only while expanding this awesome programming that you've seen, but in times of true economic crisis like what we're at. The next steps, the orange section of this slide, is our future discussions. We welcome you to the board meetings to participate in this discussion and be engaged. And we thank you so much.
All right,
And
thank
Michael,
you.
we are ready for questions.
Yes, yes. All right, the first question that I see here is if parents choose, this is probably for Dr. McWilliams-Woods, if parents choose the 100% remote online, will there be live interactions with teachers in a Google Hangout or some type of video conferencing such as what we're using right now?
Yes, the way that we will do our 100% remote, if parents choose that, we will have our own Akron Public School teachers teaching just like this, you know, doing live Google Meets, assigning, meeting regularly, because the teachers will be full-time remote. So it'll be full-time remote teachers with full-time remote students.
So for example, you might have a 3rd grade teacher or 5th grade teacher who's teaching virtually to kids from across the city instead of just at one elementary school, for example.
Yeah, it'll all be based on the numbers. Once towards the end of July, we're going to have all families choose whether they want 100% remote or whether they want blended learning. And once we see the numbers, we'll group students, and most likely we may not have enough students to make a whole class from one building. So we may combine 2 or 3 buildings together to make one virtual class for a particular grade.
Okay, what help is available for teachers regarding development of engaging curriculum that works well in a distance learning environment?
There actually are thousands of resources out there. What our curriculum staff did, we have specialists in all areas for social studies, science, English, and they went out and created a teacher toolkit that linked to all of our curriculum is already digital. So that was already foundational. And that has lots of links that go out to the world of resources to make available for our students. But then teachers also shared, the teachers have a Facebook account that have 2,000 some teachers from the Akron Public Schools. And the whole purpose of the site was to share ideas. And boy, did they share ideas. I'm not a member of that, but they shared like crazy. And I understand that in the survey, they said that was the most helpful thing, was just sharing resources back and forth.
Okay, great. If students or teachers need to teach or learn online, will they be able to go back to the original school they came from before the pandemic, or will they lose their spot at their assigned school?
No, they will. They'll still be. They'll still keep their place at the school. And the way we're thinking about whether, if a family chooses remote, we're looking at either at the quarter or the semester. We'll let families know that you can make a switch then. So, and that you would go right back to your regular school that the child has been in.
Okay. All right. So, one question is, will each school or building set up their own curriculum, or will it be district wide? And will teachers connect with students daily, which I think you already said they would. So,
yeah, because our curriculum is already digital based, that is our district adopted curriculum. So that always serves as the foundation of the lessons, but then teachers can then supplement beyond that.
okay. So a math class in 4th grade at one school to the other school is largely similar based on the teacher's own style and so on.
That's correct. And we have expectations for each of the courses because in our district, we do have some schools have higher mobility. So that's an important thing for our district, that we want to make sure the equity across our 4th grade math classes, for example, that you're not going to be way off track if you end up moving to the other part of the city. You'll pretty much fit right into that 4th grade math class as well.
Okay. What about there's extracurricular questions here too, but let's start with academics. Fine arts, band, music, vocational training. A little hard to teach welding online, I would suppose, or even music to some degree. So how is that going to be approached, especially if high school kids are going to be mostly at home?
Right. Well, the high school students, it's not necessarily they're going to be mostly at home. The high school model that was recommended last week really is a very innovative model. It's instead of prioritizing just by time when kids come in, for high school, because of our college and career academies, we really wanted to prioritize what types of activities they're coming in for. So there will be a schedule where high school students will come in, their academy teachers will say, come in on these days through this next quarter, because we're going to work on these major projects, and it'll be more on their hands-on projects in their science class or in their math class, or it might be a problem-based learning unit across content, or they may be coming in because they are in welding, they have to do lab time, so they have to come in for all of their college and career face-to-face needs in their labs. They absolutely have to do that. If you're in an engineering program, you have to come in and work on your robotics and your engineering. If you're in an architect program, you've got to come in and work on your actual designs. So that's what will be prioritized face-to-face.
And their online time will be more English and other classes that can be taught online more easily?
Some of the content will be online, but if you're going to do a project around some drama project in English class, then you can bring the students in to work collaboratively on the project. So it's prioritizing when you need the collaboration is when students are coming in. And that'll be on a set schedule, so families will know in advance what that schedule will look like.
Okay. One question is not academic related, but the busing related. How will proposed busing arrangements affect charter school transport, I guess, or private school transport, others who rely on APS buses?
Yeah, the charter and private school busing, all of the regulations, whatever comes from the Summit County Health to all the different busing providers in the county, that applies no matter what, in terms of the busing. So for us, we're needing to look exactly at how our fleet is going to be used, depending on if we do 1 student per seat, 2 students per seat, or every other seat. And you saw the huge difference for that.
Yeah.
Right now, so we're having to prioritize our fleet to make sure that we can get our students all transported. We also have other options that we can offer to families to have them transport themselves. And they can have some parent in lieu payment instead of busing. So there's other options that we're trying to put together, and then we'll communicate that to families.
Okay. Next question is, will graduation requirements for high school students be the same as they were in prior years?
They are the same. They're not waiving any of the graduation requirements in terms, at least right now, in terms of the credits that you have to earn and the different options and pathways. We're fortunate that the state had already had the wisdom to move away from only testing-based requirements. And now there's credits, and you can graduate based on some testing plus your performance in college and career activities. So there's other alternatives already that were planned, thankfully, that will help during this pandemic time. Okay.
If teachers choose to teach remotely, will they be able to choose to go back to their home school as well? I'm not following the end of this question here, but if a teacher chooses to teach remotely, will they be able to choose to go back to their home school at some point in the future, I guess is the question.
Yes, they'll maintain their place. So if they were a teacher at East Community Learning Center and they end up being one of the remote teachers, they will still maintain their spot at East as soon as we go back to school.
Okay. There's one question here. I think I'm missing part of it on the chat, but basically it says, how will a Firestone IB or PTLW student remain a part of that program if their teacher can be from anywhere in the district?
For the remote, if the question is related that if they choose to be 100% remote, the remote part is course by course. So they would be able to maintain that same connection. If they're talking about being in the blended learning where some of it is remote and some of it, then the IB teachers and the Project Lead the Way teachers would make that determination on when the students come in and put out a schedule each quarter for the student so that they see exactly when they come in for their projects in Project Lead the Way or for their projects in their IB program, their International Baccalaureate program.
I guess if you had a high school student though who was had health issues or whatever the case may be and did not want to come to school, come to the Career Academy on hands-on instruction times, how would that work in those cases where those students who need to be there in person can't be or don't want to be because of health concerns?
Yeah, because we have the opportunity to offer to all families to have students be 100%, we can accommodate based on the schedule that the student has. We'll be able to accommodate supporting them remotely. We'll be pulling specific, whatever the number of students that decide they want to be remote, we'll go ahead and pull teachers out to match that need. And remember, we also have an APS online program that we've run for 15 plus years, and we know how to be able to match kids based on the courses that they need. So we'll be able to accommodate that.
Okay. Next question, the one that gets asked everywhere these days is, will students be required to wear masks? I know the governor last week said it was highly recommended for, I think, 3rd grade and up, but what is the APS plan?
Our recommendation, and it's really important for everybody to understand that last board meeting, this 140 plus member committee brought their recommendations. And then the board is deliberating these 2 weeks. Then we're coming back to provide, it'll either be an update or the full-blown recommendation on Monday, based on now that we've had the release of the governor's guidelines. So our recommendation at the last board meeting was that all students wear a mask, and all staff have to based on governor's requirement. So our recommendation was all students, unless you had health reasons or conditions that you can't wear the mask.
All right, there's been a few questions about sports and extracurricular activities, which I guess would include plays and concerts, etc. But we've already seen Stowe's had to shut down their sports this week because of a positive test in the program. So what is your plan for athletics and extracurriculars?
We had a whole 2 separate teams, one exclusively for athletics and one for extracurricular. The athletics team went through all of the Ohio High School Athletic Association guidelines on how to start practicing in games. And they put very strict health conditions and parameters in place for our athletes to be checking their health conditions, the how to use some of the sports equipment and things like that. We've actually learned a lot from that experience this summer that will go into our experiences this fall and spring. So it's a day-to-day, just like you're saying, what happened with Stowe. It's a day-to-day monitoring, and that athletic team meets a lot each week to try to keep up with changes from the governor and changes from the Ohio High School Athletic Association. And then for the other extracurriculars, we had a separate team just on extracurriculars, and they are going through every single club and every single after-school activity, and even groups that come in from out of district that provide after-school type programming, and looking to see which ones can remain face-to-face based on the health guidelines and which ones may need to go virtual or may need to make modifications. So we'll be announcing that later this month on which ones will continue and which ones won't.
Okay. If we decide to go online only for the fall, can we go back to school in January?
Yes, we will have a process. It's either going to be that families can switch at the quarter or families can switch at the semester. That decision hasn't been made yet, but there will be a point where families can switch either to go remote or to come from remote and coming in. The reason why we have to wait till these kind of key points is because the class sizes are so critical with the social distancing that normally in a normal year, we would let families go in and out of remote and back and switch schools. And, we're very flexible that way. But for this situation, we're going to have to be tighter in terms of when people switch to make sure that we can continue the staffing and the class size to make sure everybody remains safe.
Okay, we have one question on how will art and music be approached for the younger students, K-8?
We in the Akron Public Schools, arts are actually incredibly important. You hear all across the country that arts are being cut, in schools, and that is not true in the Akron Public Schools. Fortunately, you've got a superintendent and an assistant superintendent who have grew up passionate with the fine arts and whose children, I have an actor in Chicago and David has a music major at the University of Akron. We are huge believers in the power of the arts to transform kids' lives. So we are going to continue to provide for the younger kids. The recommendations from the state are that you don't have kids moving around a lot. You keep them in cohorts. So our fine arts teachers will be coming into the classroom versus kids moving to different locations. So we'll continue the same art structure and same thing through middle school and high school, that course selections will still be offered.
All right, when teachers are teaching remotely, will they have to be at the school building or can they do that from home?
They will be at school. We're going to have all faculty come into the school. Now, if there's health issues that prevent that, we'll work with teachers individually on that. But the bulk of our remote teaching, even if we end up doing the blended where kids go a few days face-to-face and a few days remote, that the faculty will be in the school building.
Okay. And will buildings be allowed to have guests, volunteers, guest speakers, or anything like that this year?
Yeah, I think that's the toughest question.
Okay.
Because of everything that I talked about at the beginning, where we built this whole incredible college and career academies. We have 360 business partners that work with our high school students and have kids go do job shadowing and internships. They come in and work on all those professional skills with our students. They serve on advisories with us to help inform our curriculum. We have so much interaction with partners, thousands of hours. The recommendations from the governor and the Department of Health is to limit the adults coming into buildings and to limit visitors. And so right now we're feeling as though we're going to have to limit the number of additional adults that come in. And we're flipping everything, which is what we did in the spring, to virtual visits and virtual career mentoring experiences and virtual site visits, at least for the beginning of the year. And then we'll adjust as we watch to see what's happening with the pandemic.
I was curious, and this question might have also like you in the food service here for Laura. You're going to start off in this blended mode. So I presume some students will be eating lunch at school on the days they're at school, and others are going to be home and might need food. How have you approached that situation? Because it's going to be a little different than what you've done since March with providing food to everybody who was not at school.
We'll wait until the final, see what students are going to be in attendance. Hopefully by the end of July, there's a little more framework to that. And then we'll designate where the meals will be provided for the online learners.
Okay.
Yeah, we're committed to continue to feed all of our students. So that's going to be the important part, is to have that system for our remote learners to be able to come and get their food.
If we get to a situation where the governor closes schools again or whatever, you're confident you can go back and forth almost because of the way you're setting this up, that you're going to have the online only and then the blended folks, and the blended can go online only without a whole lot of trouble, at least technologically wise. You've already done it now. Is that right?
Right. And even when students are site-based, face-to-face, the teachers are going to still be using the Google Classroom to post their assignments, to post their work. Students will be distributing their homework and things like that in the Google Classroom, so that if that does happen, because it can happen on a dime. If you think about it, kids and teachers could go home one night. This is what happened back in March. And the next day, all of a sudden, we're shut down. And so we're going to continue to use our digital Google Classroom platform, even during face-to-face time, so that families and students can make that easy transition if we need to.
Okay. One other question is, will PTA units be able to meet in the buildings and do fundraisers? How's that going to work?
Yeah, we don't know the answer to that today. But we're looking at those, especially those key partners, the PTA, their family, they're a part of us. And we want to make sure we find a way that they can continue to be a part of our schools. Once we really finally look at all that guidance that came out from the state at the end of the week, we'll make that final determination. It may be that some activities they can do, but then maybe some will have to shift to virtual.
Reading some of these questions, I've been reminded that there are literally an endless number of different scenarios for every family. You have teachers that have kids in the schools in Akron or maybe in other districts, and based on how they, the kids are home or not, how do they teach? I mean, literally, there's no end to the scenarios that involve your employees, your students, and everyone. What advice do you have for parents as they evaluate the situation about what's best for them? I mean, obviously, you may be forced to change your mind at some point and be online only. But what advice do you give parents on how to evaluate the situation?
Yeah, I think it's the same advice as we've been. If you go back to those principles that I said, that those 6 things that we really focused on in terms of our design, the 2 major things for families is looking at your own health status as a family unit, is in terms of your own as parents, the grandparents that you might interact with, anybody else living in your home, and the health conditions of your child. And just take kind of a check on that to say, what would be the best case scenario for my family in terms of sending to school? So that's the health part. But then the other equally as important is the academic component. How did your child do this spring? If you're thinking remote, were they engaged? Were you able to provide the support at home to keep them engaged? The academic component, if you think about the long-lasting impact academically, if students get far behind, we know that can accumulate over time, and that can just be that snowball that all of a sudden in high school they may be dropping out or not completing, not going on to college, not going successfully into a career. So the decisions we make today, you really have to balance both. We've been taking a look at the American Academy of Pediatrics put out guidelines, and they actually talked about that balance of there are risks for students not to be in school academically because of those implications of when students get behind, what can happen in their life circumstance. So those are risks too. And then you have to look at the day-to-day health risks. So I would balance both.
Okay. I think we have time for one last question here or so, and it's a good one here. What can we as the Akron community do to help support the schools, students, and families?
I think most importantly right now is providing support to the wraparound organizations that support our families. You know, we have key partnerships with organizations like the United Way and Summit Education Initiative and the Food Bank. These are key places that provide support to all of our families. And their United Way, for example, has a fund that they're collecting funds to help support our families and the basic needs, and the Family Resource Center that Yvonne mentioned that provides that wraparound support to our families in 2 of our clusters right now. So that would be the first priority. That support also supports our technology internet. I'll do a commercial here that for us to be struggling, and every district to be struggling to get families connected to the internet is a shame in 2020 that we're even having this conversation. This should be an automatic in our community that we have 100% internet connectivity to families, because any family that has children, because of the need for access to their curriculum, to the internet, to all the resources for family members and parents to connect to employment resources, there is no way that this city shouldn't have 100% internet connectivity to all families. It shouldn't be that each school is trying to scramble and get this, and families are doing everything they can to try to get connected, not in this day and age. So those 2 would be my primary priorities.
All right. Well, I think if anyone thought that school administrators have a nice quiet summer where they relax and don't worry about much, I know it wasn't true before this summer, but it's certainly not true this summer. And we appreciate you all taking time to talk to us about what's going on. And we know there's a lot more coming our way in terms of dates and information for parents and making their selections here for how they're going to approach the school year. So, but thank you all for being with us tonight. And I guess I'll hand it back to Jackie or whomever else to wrap us up tonight.
Yes, Mike. I just want to thank our presenters on behalf of the League of Women Voters, Dr. McWilliams-Woods, Yvonne Culver, Laura Kepler, and Ryan Pendleton. This has been a most important conversation, a conversation that should continue. Mike, I want to thank you for your excellent moderating skills, and thank you for the coverage in the Beacon Journal, because really, so many of us in the community depend on that information to learn about what's happening in the schools. So thank you all, and we look forward to the future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.